I didn't go to the library to fall in love. My phone died. He offered his charger, and somehow he took my heart with it. I didn't plan to talk to anyone that night. Finals week had turned the campus library into a silent battlefield of coffee cups, tired eyes, and whispered panic. I was sitting at a corner table, surrounded by notes I barely understood, convincing myself that stress counted as studying. When my phone screen went black, I stared at it longer than I should have, hoping it would magically turn back on. It didn't. 1%, then nothing. I sighed louder than necessary, checking my bag even though I already knew I'd forgotten my charger in my dorm. That was when a shadow fell across my table and a voice I didn't recognize said, "You can use mine if you want." I looked up and saw him standing there, holding out a charger like it was no big deal. He smiled casually, the kind of smile that made you feel like he wasn't rushing anywhere. I thanked him too quickly, embarrassed by how relieved I felt. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down without asking, plugging the charger into the outlet between us. "One rule," he said lightly. "If your phone hits 100%, you have to give it back." I laughed, surprised by myself. We didn't exchange names right away. We didn't need to. He opened his laptop, and for a few minutes, we sat there quietly, my phone slowly coming back to life while my concentration disappeared completely. Eventually, he asked what I was studying, and I admitted I was completely lost. He admitted the same. That felt like permission to relax. Minutes turned into hours. We talked about everything except exams, where we were from, why we chose this college, what we thought we'd be doing in 5 years, even though neither of us sounded convinced. He told stories with his hands, expressive and animated, and I caught myself watching his face instead of listening to his words. Every time our fingers brushed near the charger, something warm settled in my chest. At some point, I realized I wasn't checking the time anymore. I wasn't checking my phone. I didn't want the charger to hit 100% because that would mean the moment had to end. When the library lights dimmed for closing, we both looked surprised. "I guess this is where we pretend to go back to real life," he said. We packed up slowly. He unplugged the charger and slipped it into his bag. At the door, he hesitated, then said, "Same time tomorrow?" I nodded, smiling more than I meant to. As I walked back to my dorm, my phone buzzed with notifications I didn't care about. All I could think about was the empty chair across from me and how easily one small moment had already changed something inside me. Have you ever met someone by accident who instantly felt important? I arrived at the library earlier the next evening than I needed to, pretending it was for studying when it was really for him. I chose the same table, the same chair, and placed my bag carefully on the floor, as if recreating the moment would summon him faster. I kept telling myself not to expect anything. People say things casually all the time. Same time tomorrow could mean nothing. Still, every time the door opened, my heart reacted before my mind could stop it. When he finally walked in, slightly out of breath like he had rushed, I felt an embarrassing wave of relief. He smiled when he saw me, the kind of smile that felt like recognition, like we already shared something. He sat across from me without hesitation and pulled out the charger again, placing it between us like a quiet promise. "Looks like I'm early this time," he said. "You're still winning," I replied, surprised by how natural it felt to talk to him. That night felt easier. We laughed more. He told me about his childhood, about moving states, about how college wasn't what he thought it would be. I told him things I usually kept to myself, how I always felt like I was catching up, how silence sometimes felt safer than speaking. He listened in a way that made me forget to be careful. We started meeting every night after that. Same table, same charger. Sometimes we studied. Sometimes we didn't even open our books. We shared playlists, coffee, late-night vending machine snacks. I learned the way he tapped his pen when he was thinking, and how he smiled when he was nervous even though he pretended not to be. I didn't realize when it happened, but the library stopped feeling like a place I came to work. It became the place I came to see him. We'd never talked about what this was. That made it feel fragile and exciting at the same time. Other students came and went. Some nights were crowded, some nights were quiet, but that chair across from me always felt reserved, like it belonged to him. One night, as we were packing up, he hesitated and said my name in a way that made me look up. He asked if I wanted to get coffee sometime outside the library. I said yes too quickly, my voice softer than I intended. He smiled, pleased, and said we would plan it after finals. After finals. The words stuck with me as I walked back to my dorm. I tried not to overthink them. I told myself it was practical, responsible. Still, something about waiting made me uneasy. Finals came and went in a blur of exhaustion and relief. On the last night, I went to the library early again. Same table, same chair. But this time, the chair across from me stayed empty. I waited longer than I should have. I checked my phone more than I wanted to. When the library lights dimmed, I finally accepted what the silence was telling me. He didn't come back. If someone slowly becomes part of your routine, do you fall without noticing? I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe he was busy. Maybe something came up. Maybe I had imagined the importance of our routine. I packed my bag slowly that night, moving like if I delayed long enough, he might still appear. He didn't. The walk back to my dorm felt longer than usual, each step heavy with questions I didn't know how to ask. The next day, I avoided the library. It felt childish, but I couldn't stand the idea of sitting at that table alone again. Instead, I studied in my room, my phone face down, pretending I wasn't hoping it would light up with his name. It never did. By evening, the quiet became unbearable. I needed answers, even if they disappointed me. I went back the following night. Same table, same chair. I didn't sit immediately. I stood there for a moment, scanning the room like I'd lost something important and expected a stranger to return it. Finally, I sat down and opened my laptop, forcing myself to focus. Minutes passed, then more. The chair across from me stayed empty, painfully visible. I started noticing him everywhere after that, or maybe I was just looking harder. A laugh in the hallway that sounded like his. A jacket the same color as the one he wore. Every almost moment made my chest tighten. I hated how easily he had slipped into my thoughts. I hated how easily he had stayed. A week passed, then another. Finals were over, campus lighter, quieter. People celebrated freedom while I felt strangely stuck, replaying conversations that no longer had a future. I wondered if I should have asked for his number sooner, if waiting made me foolish. If silence was an answer, I just didn't want to accept. One afternoon, while walking across campus, I saw him. He was standing near the student center, laughing with friends, alive and unmistakably real. My heart jumped before I could stop it. For a second, I considered turning away, preserving the version of him that belonged only to the library and the charger and quiet conversations. But my feet moved on their own. He noticed me at the same time. His smile faltered, surprise flashing across his face before something unreadable replaced it. He said my name like he wasn't sure he was allowed to. We stood there awkwardly, the noise of campus filling the space between us. I didn't know if you were still around, he said. I was, I replied, wishing my voice didn't sound so small. He apologized quickly, explaining that he had left town suddenly for family reasons. No warning, no goodbye. He said it like it explained everything. I nodded, even though part of me wanted to ask why disappearing felt easier than telling me. We talked for a few minutes, polite, careful, nothing like the library nights. When his friends called him over, he hesitated, then said, maybe we could catch up later, maybe. The word followed me long after he walked away. That night, back at the library, I sat at a different table. The charger spot was empty. I realized something then. Missing him hurt, but not knowing where I stood hurt more. I wasn't sure which scared me more. Would you accept an explanation that feels incomplete just to keep someone in your life? After that conversation, something shifted inside me. I told myself it was closure, but it felt more like a pause button I hadn't agreed to press. Days passed, and campus settled into its post-finals calm. People left for breaks, dorms emptied, and routines dissolved. I tried to convince myself that what we shared belonged to a specific moment, one that had already ended. Still, my thoughts didn't listen. He didn't text. I didn't have his number. That fact felt heavier than it should have. It meant everything we were existed only in shared spaces and perfect timing. No proof, no messages to reread, just memory. I wondered if that made it more real or easier to forget. One afternoon, I ran into him again near the coffee shop off campus. This time, it wasn't accidental. He waved first like he had been hoping to see me. We ordered drinks and sat outside, the air warmer than it had been in the library. Sunlight changed the way he looked, softer, more distant. I realized I'd never seen him like this before, not surrounded by silence, not protected by the night. We talked about light things, classes, plans. He was leaving town again soon, an internship, a good opportunity. I congratulated him and meant it, even though something tight formed in my chest. He asked what I was doing over break. I answered honestly, staying, working, waiting, though I didn't say that part. There was a moment when our conversation slowed, when the noise around us faded. He looked at me like he wanted to say something else, something heavier. Instead, he smiled and said he was glad we ran into each other. I smiled back, careful, measured. I had learned something since the library nights. Not every smile was an invitation. As we stood to leave, he reached into his bag and pulled out his charger, the same one. He held it up between us, half joking, half serious. Guess this started everything, he said. I laughed, but it sounded different now, less hopeful, more aware. He offered to walk me back to campus, and I said no, gently. I told him I had things to do. That part was true. I needed to protect the quiet space I'd built inside myself. That night, alone in my room, I replayed every interaction. Not with longing, but with clarity. I realized how easily I had filled in the blanks, how quickly I'd made him central to my days without asking if he planned to stay. He hadn't promised anything. He hadn't lied. He had just existed briefly and brightly, like something borrowed. I plugged my own charger into the wall and watched my phone come back to life. For the first time, I didn't wish it belonged to him. I wished I'd asked myself earlier what I wanted and whether waiting felt like hope or avoidance. When someone comes back casually after disappearing, do you reopen the door or keep it closed? I thought distance would make things clearer, but it only rearranged my thoughts instead of quieting them. With fewer students on campus, everything felt louder in its emptiness. I filled my days with work shifts and long walks, convincing myself that staying busy meant moving on. Still, every time my phone vibrated, my heart reacted before my logic could intervene. I hated how instinctive it was. Weeks passed without seeing him. That should have been enough. Instead, I found myself measuring time by the absence of moments we no longer shared. No library nights, no charger between us, no conversations that wandered until closing time. I told myself that what we had wasn't real in the way relationships were supposed to be. It didn't have a label. It didn't have a future. That didn't stop it from lingering. One evening, I finally returned to the library, not because I expected him, but because avoiding it felt like giving something up. I chose a different table, farther from the outlets, and spread my books out like a barrier. I focused harder than I had in weeks. It felt good to reclaim the space, to remind myself that the library existed before him and would exist after. Halfway through the night, I heard my name. I looked up, and there he was again, standing uncertainly like he wasn't sure he was allowed to approach. I felt a mix of surprise and calm, the kind that comes when you realize you've already imagined this moment enough times that reality feels familiar. He asked if he could sit. I nodded. He didn't pull out the charger this time. That felt intentional. We talked quietly, carefully, like we were both aware that this version of us was different. He told me about his internship, about being busy, about how leaving had been harder than he expected. I listened, but I didn't fill the silence for him. At some point, he admitted he had thought about me more than he should have. The words landed softly without drama. I didn't rush to respond. I thought about how those words would have thrilled me weeks ago. Now they just made me tired. I told him the truth, that I liked him, that I had enjoyed what we shared, that disappearing without explanation had hurt more than he realized. He nodded, accepting it without defending himself. That mattered, but it didn't erase the past. When the library announced closing time, we stood up together. At the door, he hesitated, then asked if we could try again. Slowly, properly. I looked at him for a long moment, searching for the feeling I used to chase. It was still there, but quieter, less urgent. I told him I needed time, not as a test, as a boundary. He respected that, and somehow that made saying no easier. As I walked back alone, I realized something important. Falling in love had been easy. Choosing myself felt harder, but right. When someone comes back ready, but you're no longer the same, do you give them another chance? Needing time sounded simple when I said it out loud, but living inside that decision felt complicated. Days passed, and I noticed how often my thoughts drifted back to him, not with longing, but with reflection. I replayed our conversations differently now, paying attention to what I had ignored before. The pauses, the assumptions, the way I had filled silence with hope instead of questions. He didn't push. That surprised me. No messages left at mutual places. No attempts to casually run into me. His absence this time felt intentional, respectful. That made it harder in an unexpected way. It removed the version of him I could blame. It left me alone with my own feelings. I focused on myself in small, deliberate ways. Morning runs, journaling, sitting in the library without headphones, letting the quiet exist without trying to replace it. I started enjoying my own company again, something I hadn't realized I'd been neglecting. I remembered who I was before my days revolved around an empty chair and a borrowed charger. Then one afternoon, he sent a message through a mutual friend asking if we could talk. No urgency, no pressure, just an invitation. I stared at the words longer than necessary, checking in with myself instead of reacting. I agreed. We met at a park near campus, neutral ground. He looked nervous, which felt humanizing. We sat on opposite ends of a bench, space between us that neither of us rushed to close. He told me he understood if my answer was still no, that he wanted honesty more than comfort. I appreciated that. I told him how the waiting had changed me, how I realized I wanted consistency, not intensity, presence, not potential. He listened without interrupting, without trying to turn my words into reassurance for himself. When I finished, he nodded slowly and said he couldn't promise perfection, but he could promise effort and communication. That was new and real. We didn't decide anything that day. No labels, no plans, just clarity. We agreed to start with something small. Coffee, conversations outside the library, chargers optional. As I walked away, I felt lighter. Not because everything was resolved, but because I had stopped abandoning myself to keep someone else close. Later that night, alone in my room, I realized something important. Love didn't have to arrive dramatically to be meaningful. It could grow quietly if given the right conditions, but only if both people stayed present. I plugged in my phone before it died, smiling at the thought. This time, I wasn't waiting for someone else to save the battery. I was learning how to stay charged on my own. Do you believe love should restart slowly after trust is shaken? Or is it better to let it go completely? Starting over felt nothing like the beginning. There was no rush, no late-night confessions, no charger placed between us like a symbol. Instead, there was intention. We met for coffee during daylight hours. We talked about ordinary things, classes, movies, plans that didn't stretch too far into the future. It was calm, almost unfamiliar, and I kept waiting for the spark to either flare up or disappear completely. At first, I wondered if I'd imagined the intensity of what we shared before. This version of us was quieter, more careful. He asked before assuming. He showed up when he said he would. I noticed how different that felt in my body. Less anxiety, less anticipation, more steadiness. Still, there were moments when memory crept in. A song we once shared played in the cafe. I caught him tapping his pen the same way he used to in the library. Those moments tightened something in my chest, not with pain, but with awareness. We were building something new on top of something unfinished. One evening, he asked if I wanted to study together again, not at the library, at a small study lounge in one of the quieter buildings. I agreed after a pause. When we sat down, he placed his charger on the table, then pushed it slightly toward the center before stopping himself. He smiled, almost embarrassed, and moved it back to his side. We don't have to do that anymore, he said. I nodded, appreciating that he noticed. We studied for a while, genuinely this time. When we took breaks, we talked about boundaries, expectations, and how we both handled disappointment. It wasn't romantic in the way movies describe. It was better, honest, grounded. As the night went on, I realized I wasn't counting minutes anymore. I wasn't wondering what this meant or where it would lead. I was present. When we left, he walked me part of the way back, stopping at the corner instead of insisting on more. That restraint mattered. Later, alone, I thought about how different love felt when it wasn't fueled by uncertainty. I missed the intensity sometimes, the way my heart used to race. But I didn't miss the waiting, the doubt, the feeling of being optional. This version asked me to show up fully, not disappear into hope. A few days later, he surprised me by remembering something small I had mentioned weeks ago. My favorite tea. He brought it to our next coffee meeting without making a big deal of it. That gesture settled something inside me. Consistency didn't shout, it whispered. I wasn't in love yet, not again, but I was open, and that felt like progress. Is slow and steady love better than intense beginnings that burn out too fast? Time began to move differently after that, not in a dramatic way, but in a steady rhythm that felt almost unfamiliar. Weeks passed, and our conversations deepened without rushing. We shared more about our fears than our fantasies, what scared us about the future, what we needed to feel safe, what we were still healing from. I noticed how carefully he chose his words now, as if he understood that honesty mattered more than charm. I caught myself laughing again without restraint. Not the nervous laughter I used to hide behind, but the kind that surprised me. We developed routines that belonged to this new version of us. Morning texts that didn't demand immediate replies, evening walks that ended early enough to respect rest. It wasn't cinematic, but it was real. One night, we found ourselves back at the library by coincidence. A late study session neither of us had planned. We stood there for a moment, unsure, memories pressing in quietly. Then he asked if I wanted to sit together. I agreed, heart steady. We chose a table near the windows, not the old one. The charger stayed in his bag. Sitting there, I realized how much had changed. The space between us felt intentional, not uncertain. Our hands rested close but didn't reach. There was no tension, only awareness. I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to happen. I felt like something already was. As we packed up, he told me he had turned down an extension for his internship. He said it calmly, without expectation. He wanted to be present. I didn't respond right away. I didn't want responsibility for his choices. He noticed and quickly added that it was what he wanted, not something he was doing for me. That distinction mattered. Walking out together, I felt a quiet shift, not excitement, alignment, the kind that doesn't announce itself. I realized I trusted him more than I realized, not blindly, carefully. Later that night, alone, I thought about how love had changed shape. It wasn't something that happened to me anymore. It was something I participated in. That realization felt powerful. I plugged my phone in before sleeping, smiling at the habit I'd formed. I no longer associated power with someone else. I carried it myself. When love becomes calm instead of thrilling, do you see it as growth or loss? There was a moment when I realized I wasn't guarding my heart as tightly anymore. It happened quietly, without ceremony. I was telling him about a bad day, about feeling overwhelmed and unsure, and instead of minimizing it or fixing it, he simply listened. He stayed present. That was new for me. I noticed how my shoulders relaxed without permission. Our relationship still didn't have a label, but it had shape. We showed up for each other in small, reliable ways. He walked me home when I asked. He respected when I needed space. I noticed how I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head before seeing him. I trusted the silence between us. One afternoon, we sat in the grass outside a campus building, watching students rush past with purpose and panic. He asked me if I was scared of falling in love again. The question caught me off guard. I thought about it carefully before answering. I told him I wasn't scared of love. I was scared of losing myself in it. He nodded like he understood exactly what I meant. He admitted he had been careless before, not cruel, just unaware. He said disappearing had been easier than facing uncertainty. Saying it out loud seemed to matter to him. It mattered to me too. I didn't need punishment. I needed understanding. That night, back in my room, I opened my journal and reread old entries from the weeks he had been gone. The longing, the confusion, the way I had shrunk myself into waiting. I closed the notebook gently, grateful for the distance between that version of me and who I was now. A few days later, during a quiet walk, he reached for my hand. Not suddenly, not possessively, just enough to ask. I intertwined my fingers with his without hesitation. It felt simple, earned. We didn't say anything about it. We didn't need to. Some things are clearest when they aren't announced. I knew then that I was falling in love again. Not because of grand gestures or dramatic moments, but because I felt safe being honest. Because I didn't feel like I had to prove my worth to be chosen. Because love felt like a place I could stand, not something I had to chase. When we parted that night, I walked back alone, smiling softly. I thought about how strange it was that something as small as a borrowed charger had started all of this. Not the love itself, but the lesson. That connection doesn't always arrive fully formed. Sometimes it asks you to lose it first, just to see what really matters. What makes you feel safe enough to fall in love again? I used to think love announced itself loudly, like a moment you could point to and say, this is where everything changed. Now I know it's quieter than that. It settles in slowly, almost unnoticed, until one day you realize you're no longer bracing yourself for loss. You're just living. We never had a dramatic conversation about being together. No official beginning. One day it simply felt true. He was there when my classes overwhelmed me. I was there when his plans shifted unexpectedly. We adjusted without resentment. We checked in. We stayed. One evening, months after the library nights, we found ourselves walking past the same building where we first met. He stopped suddenly and smiled like he had remembered something important. He reached into his bag and pulled out the charger, the same one, slightly worn now. He held it out to me, not offering it, just showing it. I almost lost this, he said. Didn't realize how much it mattered until I thought it was gone. I laughed softly, feeling something warm spread through my chest. It wasn't about the charger anymore. It never really was. It was about timing, about choosing to stay, even when it felt easier to disappear. Later that night, alone in my room, I thought about the girl I had been during finals week. Tired, distracted, open in ways she didn't understand yet. I felt tenderness toward her instead of embarrassment. She hadn't been foolish. She had been brave enough to feel without guarantees. Love didn't steal my focus like I once feared. It sharpened it. I didn't disappear into him. I expanded alongside him. That distinction mattered more than anything. Before sleeping, I plugged my phone in and watched the battery climb steadily. No rush, no anxiety, just trust that it would reach full charge by morning. I smiled at the metaphor I no longer needed but still appreciated. I fell in love with the boy who borrowed my charger, but more importantly, I fell in love with the version of myself who learned to ask for consistency, who learned to wait for effort, who learned that being chosen should never feel uncertain. If love ever leaves again, I know I'll be okay, because I won't lose myself in the waiting. I'll recognize absence for what it is and choose presence instead. Sometimes the smallest moments don't change your life instantly. They change the way you live it afterward, and that stays with you long after the charger is returned. Do you believe the best love stories are the ones that teach you how to choose yourself too?